Ah, you're back again, and my visual is apparently absent once more. I guess that can only mean one thing. It is time for me to continue my dismantling of iERROR's apologetics booklet, The Eternal Challenge, A Journey Through the Miraculous Qur'an, a book which has, so far, failed to impress me in any way, besides a complete inability to make a supported and well-reasoned point, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. Today's chapter is Preservation. Let us continue. Have you ever thought about how the religious scriptures that we have today have been passed down to us throughout history? Thanks to innovations like the printing press, we live in a world which allows for the mass distribution of information, so we no longer have to worry about the loss of our religious scriptures. In fact, we have probably taken their preservation for granted. But advances in technology, such as printing, only account for a small portion of the histories of most religious texts, which span thousands of years. The vast majority of religious texts today have been passed down to us by the scribal tradition, whereby manuscripts are manually copied word for word, by hand, using materials like ink and leather. Is this method of preserving information reliable? Have a think about communication in the modern world, such as email or text messages. Have you ever sent an email or text message that contains spelling and grammar mistakes, even with the benefit of spell check features that exist in modern computers and phones? Even professional media outlets often print newspapers and magazines with grammatical mistakes. Now imagine having to copy an entire book of hundreds of pages manually by hand, using only paper and ink, without relying on modern technology. It would undoubtedly be filled with mistakes. Well, yes and no, I still expect mistakes to exist, but you've not really addressed the fact that spell check has made us lazy, not to mention that spell check is there for the average person, not trained professionals whose very job it is to copy text, for example, in the traditional format. That little aid has made us lazy to making mistakes and to proofreading and to checking our work. Older methods would not have this, and the people using those methods would double check. Could mistakes still occur? Sure. But I'd argue not actually like the average Joe with a mobile phone. This is exactly what we find when we compare the manuscript copies of religious text from the past. They are filled with spelling mistakes, missing words and sentences. There were even cases where scribes made intentional changes to suit an agenda. It was easy to do this without most people realizing, because literacy rates in the ancient past were very low and there were very few scribes. Now extend this copying process over hundreds or thousands of years. You can imagine how much a text can change over such a long span of time, as accidental and intentional changes gradually creep in. Now imagine if you had the task of evaluating all these written copies with their different words and sentences. You would have to compare each of them to the original, word by word and line by line. This would be an extremely time-consuming task, but if you had enough time or enough people helping you, eventually you could work out which copies are the most accurate when compared to the original. Now imagine if you had to perform the same task of evaluating all these variations, but this time you do not possess the original to compare against. It would be almost impossible to determine their accuracy. This brings us to another major problem with relying on physical manuscripts for the preservation of information. Over time, they can be lost or become damaged. so we don't always have access to the original or even early copies. Therefore, we lose the ability to determine which of the copies we possess is the most accurate. Muslims believe God sent down the Qur'an to Muhammad and other revelation to other prophets. We believe in what was originally sent down to Moses and Jesus. For the sake of comparison, let's examine the state of the Bible today. What we find is exactly what one would expect of any ancient text which has been manually copied over thousands of years. There are numerous versions of the Bible in existence today. The oldest manuscripts that have survived happen to be dated to hundreds of years after their original revelation. Given what we've discussed about the difficulties of copying text by hand, now we can appreciate why there are different versions of the Bible. Scholars of the Bible, those who are experts in sifting through the huge numbers of variations that exist in the manuscript tradition, can't agree on which copies are the most accurate. This is because they have the difficult task of estimating which copies are closest to the original without possessing the original to compare against. Each version of the Bible that exists is a patchwork of different copies combined together and represents what a particular scholar or group of scholars estimate to be the closest match to the original. So with texts that have relied on manual copying for preservation, at best we can say that we have an estimate of the original words. We can't say with 100% certainty that what we have today, however, is an accurate representation of the original. But this raises one serious question. Why did Allah pick the date and location that He did to reveal the Qur'an? Why not wait until the Middle East had access to at least simple methods of woodblock printing, or give them that technology, or simply go elsewhere where woodblock printing was already in use? There were versions of printing available as early as 220 AD during the Han Dynasty. Now, these were simple wooden stamps and couldn't be rearranged or mass-produced like the 12th century onward versions, but if you just wanted to print the Qur'an, then it would work perfectly. Nobody could mess with it. You would need a lot of blocks, which would take a vast amount of wealth, but we're on about a God who could apparently inspire their followers to take entire cities. Or again, just inspire a few people in the Middle East to invent this technology. But no, your God relied on methods which have actually led to variations in length and number of chapters. How is that logical? The collection of Ubay in Ka'b has 116 chapters, and the Quran of in Musad has 111. The typical Quran, much like the New International Version of the Bible today, has 114. Now, these numbers appear small, but remember that a chapter can have several hundred verses, and all of those are just removed or added. So there became a dominant one. It was in no way the only version, so don't pretend so. And you may say, well, we decided this one was most accurate. To which I respond, without the original, how do you know which one is most accurate? How can you demonstrate objectively that the version you use today, most typically, is the most accurate? See, you've attacked biblical scholars for this, and yet you yourselves are also victim of the same issue. Without the original, you can't claim that it is accurate. Now that we have a background to the transmission of ancient text, let's turn our attentions to the Qur'an. What about the Qur'an? Has its preservation also been compromised? The author of the Qur'an makes a bold claim. We have sent down the Qur'an ourselves, and we ourselves will guard it. God bless his final revelation, the Qur'an, with something that was not bestowed on any of the prior scriptures. He promised to protect and preserve it from any corruption. You might be wondering, how can such a bold claim be true in light of what we know about the consistent corruption of previous religious scripture throughout history? Unlike other scriptures, the primary means of preserving the Qur'an has and always will be through memorization. And we have certainly made the Qur'an easy for remembrance. So is there any who will remember? Is memorization really a practical way of preserving the Qur'an? One of the ways that God made the Qur'an easy to remember is the unique style of the Qur'an itself. It has rhyming style, much like poetry. Have a think back to when you were at school. Most of us have probably forgotten many of the finer details of what we learnt at school, such as the dates of various events we studied in subjects like history, or the formulas and equations we learnt in subjects like mathematics and physics. This is because we haven't used the knowledge since leaving school, and human beings naturally forget things over time. What's interesting is that many of us can easily recall the words of the nursery rhymes we used to sing in school, or even the lyrics of a song we haven't listened to in years. The difference is that the words of nursery rhymes and the lyrics of songs have a certain rhyme, and rhythm allows us to easily recall the information, even without making a conscious effort to remember it. Much in the same way, then, since the Qur'an rhymes like poetry and has a strong rhythm, it is easy to memorize. Prophet Muhammad was tasked by God with memorizing, transmitting, and explaining the verses of the Qur'an to the Muslims as they were revealed from God to him through the angel Gabriel. Truly, this Qur'an has been sent down by the Lord of the worlds. The trustworthy spirit, Angel Gabriel, brought it down to your heart, the Prophet, so that you could bring warning. In turn, these Muslims who learnt the Qur'an directly from Prophet Muhammad himself, known as the companions, passed on what they had memorized to neighboring tribes and nations. What a terrible idea! The only reason you learn rhymes in school is because you are not allowed to take a textbook into the exam. It is the next best thing, not the best thing, and that is something everyone experiences in everyday life. We get up to do something, walk into another room, and forget what we are intending on doing. Why? Because our memory, whilst yes, being good enough for the job, is not this incredible and invaluable thing. Not when it comes to remembering the details. That's why eyewitness reports are treated somewhat gingerly in criminal cases. For starters, suggestibility is massive. Con artists rely on it as the trick of trade, and if someone misremembers a word by accident, and they are either A, of high status, or B, charismatic, it does not take long for that edit to permeate and become the norm in the population. This is a well-documented phenomenon by researchers such as Loftus and Palmer or Ketchum. And that's just the suggestibility bit. When you look at social cohesion, we find the exact same thing. It doesn't take long for an idea to spread throughout a population, and people are quite suggestible. And a rhyme does not magically overcome that. Have you ever listened to a song and sang it with your friends, only to find out you had one of the words wrong? My stepmother thought that the Elvis song, Devil in Disguise, like dressing up, was devil in the sky, as in up in the air. And her father is a massive Elvis fan, and she had heard it all her life growing up. But still, she got it wrong, and the only reason we could show her that was the written lyrics and the written title of the song. Do you see the problems you still have to overcome? Fact is, because you don't have the original scripture, you can't verify it. That's the issue here. It must be noted that the Qur'an was revealed gradually to Prophet Muhammad over a period of 23 years. The disbelievers also say, why was the Qur'an not sent down to him all at once? We sent it in this way to strengthen your heart. We gave it to you in gradual revelation. Gradual revelation was a wise way of facilitating the memorization of the Qur'an by the early Muslims at large. It should be noted that the revelations of previous prophets, such as Moses, were not gradual but rather given all at once. The Qur'an informs us about Moses. We inscribed everything for him in the tablets which taught and explained everything, saying, hold on to them firmly and urge your people to hold fast to their excellent teachings. I will show you the end of those who rebel. This legacy of mass memorization has continued throughout Islamic history. Muslims today have no doubt about the perfect preservation of the Qur'an. This oral tradition, spanning nearly 1,500 years, has seen the Qur'an being passed down from teacher to student in an unbroken chain going all the way back to Prophet Muhammad himself. Today, it is estimated that there are many millions of Muslims who have memorized the entire Qur'an from cover to cover in its original Arabic. The problem here is that not everybody knows the words. They mumble it in mass like a national anthem and make it through. Arabic has an estimated 290 million native speakers and an estimated total of 460 million speakers, and yet Islam boasts 1.6 billion adherents. That means 1.14 billion Muslims don't have a clue as to what the Qur'an actually says. And by the way, when I say Arabic, I mean if we pretend the countless variations are one language and not countless dialects spanned across the Middle East. I found at least a range of between 10 and 20 major dialects, ignoring the majority of variation that exists. So this claim does not stand up upon inspection. And by the way, this is assuming that every single Arabic speaker is a Muslim, which is not the case. This is testament to the promise made by God to protect the Qur'an. The Orientalist scholar William Graham stated that the Qur'an is perhaps the only book, religious or secular, that has been memorized completely by millions of people. Here are just a few examples of what some other non-Muslim textual scholars have to say about the preservation of the Qur'an. The Orientalist A.T. Welch writes, "For Muslims, the Qur'an is much more than scripture or sacred literature in the usual Western sense. Its primary significance, or the vast majority through the centuries, has been in its oral form, the form in which it first appeared, as the recitation chanted by Muhammad to his followers over a period of about 20 years. The revelations were memorized by some of Muhammad's followers during his lifetime, and the oral tradition that was thus established has had a continuous history ever since. In some ways independent of and superior to the written Qur'an. Through the centuries, the oral tradition of the entire Qur'an has been maintained by the professional reciters. Until recently, the significance of the recited Qur'an has seldom been fully appreciated in the West. Bible scholar Kenneth Cragg reflects that this phenomenon of Qur'anic recital means that the text has traversed the centuries in an unbroken living sequence of devotion. It cannot therefore be handled as an antiquarian thing, nor as a historical document out of a distant past. The fact of Qur'anic memorization has made the Qur'an a present possession through all the lapse of Muslim time, and given it is a human currency in every generation, never allowing its regulation to a bare authority for reference alone. It must be pointed out that every Muslim of the estimated 1.5 billion Muslims in the world memorizes at least some parts of the Qur'an in Arabic in order to be able to pray like Prophet Muhammad. In fact, if every written copy of religious scripture in existence today were to be somehow destroyed, then it is only the Qur'an that could be recreated perfectly thanks to its mass memorization. What absolute bollocks! Many Jewish children, like Muslim children, are forced to recite the Torah from memory, and I know many Christians who have memorized entire chapters of the Bible, and even a few who have memorized the entire thing. And there are guides out there to help them to do so. But most believers know some of their religious scripture from heart and from memory because, like Muslims, they have to recite prayer. So that's nothing special to you, so why you're pretending it's special is beyond me. It would take them time to compile, just like it would take Muslims time to compile the Quran. Yet they would be able to piece it together in the exact same fashion with the exact same accuracy. But forgetting that, your religion is not the only one to have continued oral tradition, because yes, both Christianity and Judaism did once have the oral tradition as well, but Hinduism has the Vedic chants, which are similar to Islamic recitation, yet are the oldest oral tradition continued today. They actually date all the way back to the early Iron Age, and they rhyme. Funny that, they rhyme just like yours. So please don't pretend like you have something special in Islam, as that is a bold-faced lie. There is nothing special about the Quran, Quranic recitation, or any of that crap. Those who memorize the Quran are people of all ages. The vast majority are not Arabs and don't even speak Arabic as a language. The oral tradition of the Quran is a phenomenon unique to Islam. Question: why would another religion memorize the Quran? They wouldn't. Fact is, there are many religions which do memorize their scriptures, so if that was what you actually meant, then again, you are not telling the truth. Also, declaring that most people who recite the Quran have no idea what it says does not help you. it actually harms your case, as all those people are key points for mistakes to be introduced into the system. Just think about how non-German people say the names of various German philosophers, sociologists, and scientists. It's quite funny, and it's the same principle, because the wrong pronunciation, the wrong telling, can continue to circulate, and it can actually correct people. I say correct in captions here. It can correct people to say the incorrect pronunciation. Is there any reason to doubt the reliability of the oral tradition? The estimated millions who have memorized the Qur'an in the world have learnt the Qur'an via a direct transmission starting from Prophet Muhammad himself. The implications of this are astonishing. If millions of people who have memorized the Qur'an can trace their oral memorization of the Qur'an down the centuries of teachers and scholars all the way back to Prophet Muhammad himself, who could doubt the authenticity of this oral tradition? Especially if these millions of memorizers live in different places in the world and have learnt the Qur'an from different teachers and scholars. The amount of varying oral transmission and the amount of people who have learnt the Qur'an, and the fact that there are no discrepancies in what they have memorized, is not a historical accident. The conclusion can only be that the Qur'an memorized today is the one that was taught over 1,400 years ago. There is no other rational explanation for this unique oral phenomenon, unless someone argues that all of these memorizations throughout the ages, at different points in time and different places in the world, somehow came together to ensure that they all memorized and recited the exact same Qur'an. To pose such an argument, however, is conspirational and absurd. Or, with international communication, if someone says something perceived as wrong, even if they've got it right, they could be corrected by another group, and that's how the infection of ideas occur. So, no, you don't have that argument. You can pretend you have that argument, but you don't. Why? There is no evidence for it. Prior to the Qur'an and Muslims having access to the printing press, there were variations in the Qur'an, but they were trapped in the Middle East. This made it relatively easy for one set of scripture to become the dominant one and lead to what we see today, compared to, say, the Bible, which was spread over a much wider range much earlier on and led to far more manuscripts. Not to mention various schisms, etc., but that's just a whole other topic. You can say that the recitations from all over the world are completely the same, but I doubt that. I very much doubt that. I imagine if I do go to certain parts of Africa and compare what they recite there to different parts of the Middle East, they will be different, and there will be very key differences in there. But the public speakers who come together will resolve those differences during coming together. And I imagine there is a hierarchy on which nations have more authority, starting from the Middle East and permeating outwards. I imagine there is that hierarchy on, actually, I should listen to this person, which would explain the reason you see this phenomenon in public speakers. Not the actual down-to-earth day-to-day believer, just the public speaker. It has nothing to do with an apparent miracle or conspiracy. It has everything to do with environmental factors, and that is all. Period. What is absurd is your pretense that there is no variation in the Qur'an, that there are no disagreements to what it actually says, and that Islam is unique in its oral tradition. This may bode well as a form of mental masturbation, but as an actual argument put forward to someone with the ability and desire to question what you say, that bugger sinks faster than a lead brick. And seeing as you are about to move on to a sub-chapter, I feel that is enough torture for today.